Fabulous lineup of people with you today. We've a fabulous lineup of people to contribute today, I'm delighted to say. We've got, first of all, Stephen Scoffham, who has written many atlases, as well as contributing lots and lots of other work on atlases and globes. And we've got Paula Owens. Many of you will know Paula's name from her extensive work with the Geographical Society and also for her work with the Ordnance Survey, which she will be referring to later on. So very great welcome to Stephen and Paula. Thank you very much indeed for accepting our invitation to join us today. So we are now recording this session, which means it will be available on GeogLive, on our GeogLive YouTube channel for anybody who would like to see it. Anybody who's joining us today, or any of your colleagues who can't join us today, please do tell them about the website, and then they can have a look at all the content that we're doing today. So, as you can see, we've got a program here. Do use the chat. We will be recording, as I've already said. We would ask you please to take your cameras off until we get to the question and answer session at the end of the program. And can I also remind you, please, to respect the work. Anthony, could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Could I also ask you please to respect the work of the contributors who are giving us such fabulous input today. This session is brought to you by the Early Years and Primary Committee of the Geographical Association, and we really would be very grateful if you share this work, but also if you acknowledge the source. So please do tell your friends and colleagues about what we do today, pass on information about GeogLive, but please ask anybody who uses it to respect the intellectual property rights of our colleagues who are delivering for us today. Thank you very much. Okay, so that being said, I'm now going to pass on to Tess, who is going to speak about the recent, in fact, is it just about to be published edition of Primary Geography Test?
Yes, it is indeed, Julia. And we're so excited about this spring edition, which is due out any minute, just as you say. And it focuses on the geography of togetherness, connections, interconnections. I think something so welcome in these times. So I just wanted to briefly flag up some of the wonderful articles in this edition. There are very many. And one of our contributors today, Paula Owens and Ben Ballin, revisit some ideas about community cohesion and the role of primary geography in supporting it. All subjects have a contribution to make to this agenda around community cohesion, but I think geography in particular has something of real value in enabling learners to think more positively and knowledgeably about people, places, and environments. And as a tool for understanding community cohesion and its relationship to primary geography, they have created a draft framework that maps geography's key concepts against a range of scales. And over successive issues, they hope to offer further thoughts about primary geography and community cohesion, including exemplifications of what it can look like in practice. And we'd love, and this goes for everything, Julia and everyone here today, we'd love to get feedback on the articles, thoughts, examples from across the geography community. So this is another chance for you to communicate, to contribute to the journal and primary geography thinking. So please do keep in touch with us. We've got in Uniting in a Geography Club, Jess Hill, who is mentioned a little bit later, describes how pupils' passion for the Antarctic brought them together and led them to form a geography club in their Leeds primary school. They found that the resources were able to unite pupils as citizen geographers with this common goal and inspire them to care about distant places and drive collaborative efforts towards positive change. So a wonderful example of togetherness. Further example in unrecognised states, we've got Liam Saddington and Fiona McConnell using questions about unrecognised states to engage pupils with ideas about political geography. And the materials used allowed pupils to think a bit differently about those neatly coloured maps that we see all over classroom walls, and to engage with some of those communities whose struggles I think are often overlooked in the classroom. And it resulted in some really sophisticated and high-level geography thinking. So some really interesting and engaging stuff there. We've got a couple of articles about distant localities, identifying how we relate to them and how our perceptions of them differ. And another of our contributors here this evening, which is wonderful, Stephen Scoffham, looks at New Zealand as a country apart, offering unexpected connections and also fascinating comparisons to the UK. While Rob Unwin and Manju Patel Nair examine how school linking can help foster a geography of togetherness. Taking the felling of the tragic felling of the tree at Sycamore Gap as a starting point, in an article about the importance of trees, Steve Rawlinson, here also tonight, explores their importance in our psyche and considers our relationship with these beings, their significance in our physical and mental landscape, and how pupils can be encouraged to engage with them. And then in the article, A Peace Through Geography, Jackie Zammit offers ideas and approaches for fostering peace through geography. Creating space for peace in the geography curriculum encourages pupils to pose many rich questions about the world and lead them to undertake more in-depth work about complex issues. And then in Division and Togetherness, Alan Parkinson outlines how organisations and individuals are striving to ensure that the countryside is more inclusive for all our young people and visitors, and suggests ways in which your pupils can investigate these issues in their local areas. And I just have to mention, because both of you are here, in a further article, not up there, but there's a wonderful further article called Everywhere is Interesting, and I think not a truer word could be said. Our own Julia Tanner and Paula Richardson share ideas from the National Festival of Fieldwork, which is an annual event providing support for inclusive fieldwork for everyone. So lots there. So this whole issue is absolutely stuffed full of wonderful ideas for developing your pupils' thinking about inclusivity, togetherness, and how communities can achieve so much more together. It's an issue of hope and inspiration and shows the power of geographical thinking in the curriculum. And I commend it very highly to you all and look forward to getting some feedback. Anthony, just one more slide, please. Thank you very much. That's brilliant. So from the GA resources, as we do each time, relevant to the focus for today, we have got loads and loads of resources that are available around practical approaches to teaching map work at all levels of primary. And they are available at a discounted price to Primary Member Plus. So as a New Year resolution, why not, if you haven't already, upgrade your membership and join the GA as Primary Plus member and take advantage of that discount. And that is my hard sell for today. So I am done. Thank you very much, and please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tess. As ever, we're all looking forward to another fabulous edition of Primary Geography, which should be landing on our doormat soon, I think. Right, Sophie and Sally, you are both here now. So would you like to talk about these fabulous book collections you put together for us now? I think I've got the one done by Sally up on the screen. Sally, are you ready to talk about this?
Hi, yeah, this is Sophie's, if Sophie is here and would like to contribute.
Sophie, I wasn't certain whose was whose. Sophie, if you're here.
Hi, I am
Yes,
here.
Sophie.
I haven't got video and I've got a child climbing on me, so I'll do my best to talk, but I do apologise to anyone if they hear screaming. So this is basically a compilation of atlases, because I think a very important part of children learning to read maps and enjoy maps. Oh, am I still here? I hope I am. Rory's just got rid of the screen. A very important part of learning to read and enjoy maps is reading maps for pleasure, and experiencing maps. So I've basically got together a whole list of maps covering a whole range of different topics. So there is one there I believe every child will enjoy and connect with. And I'm going to leave it there and pass over to Sally just because Rory is making this very, very tricky. So I apologise.
That's fantastic, Sophie. Thank you so much for putting that together. I'm desperate to have a look at some of these atlases myself now. It includes some I've never seen. So thank you so much for doing that. Sally, are you ready to speak about this next one?
Yes, can do. So it's the one after this, I think. So these are still atlases for pleasure. Oh.
Oh,
Ooh.
have we not got the right slide there? Is it right at the end, Anthony?
I can bring up the PDF if that's helpful.
Yeah.
I didn't do screen grabs of everything, so I can bring that up. I think.
So my starting point for the book list was thinking about how you could explicitly bring mapping into classroom lessons to deliver a lesson that does kind of start to tick the boxes for those map skills. So mine was a separate PDF, possibly.
Apologies. I will download that and we perhaps talk about that at the end,
Yeah.
Julia.
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm so sorry, Sally. I thought we'd got them all now. Anthony, if you could do that, that would be fantastic. Okay. In that case, having just looked at some of the range of fantastic atlases that are available on every possible theme and topic to interest every possible child, we'll pass on to Stephen Scoffham, expert on children's atlases, who is going to give us an input on using them effectively in the classroom.
Thank you very much. And what fun. I've enjoyed, I do love the covers of Primary Geographer, going back to the new one. Every cover is an absolute triumph. And those atlases, so many of them and lots of different themes. So my session or input is a fairly brief one. I'm going to look at using, really focusing on the world map and different ways of using it. There's a very simple structure. I'll focus especially on the globe and Key Stage 1 at the beginning, and I'll be focusing more on atlases and Key Stage 2 as we go on. So there's a little bit of a sort of flow to it. And most of the images, just about all of them, I think, come from the atlases that I've worked on and the books that I've worked on. So that's their sort of source of, just sort of say that's their provenance, as it were. So it's something as a consultant. I'm a consultant for Collins on atlases and textbooks, and it's really good fun because it's so graphical. And that's one of the things which geography does better than or more than any other subject. It uses maps, it uses diagrams, and it uses charts and so on. It puts them all together to tell that story of the world. Quite a lot of what I'm going to say, I suppose, is about naming of parts. And Julia, if I get too carried away and don't stop in time, do let me know. I haven't got a watch, so we'll just sort of see how things go. But have the next one and just begin placing our Earth in context, as it were. And there's a clip of the 8 planets. There's one at the edge, which we don't quite know whether it's a planet or not. We keep on talking about it, but 8 seems a pretty good number. And even that little diagram shows comparatively how close the planets around us, Mercury, Venus and Mars are, and then how much bigger and further away the other ones are. And that idea that we are spinning around in space in the great sort of void is, that's the big one, isn't it? That sort of places us. And here at the bottom is the blue marble picture, the Earth as seen from the moon in the great darkness of space. And from a sustainability point of view, that immediately makes the point that, this is our home, it's our only home, and we got nowhere else. So that is a desirable residence, a very desirable residence to treasure and to nurture. Lots of teaching ideas around this, at both Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, maybe a mobile with paper plates and so on of the different planets arranged around a great bigger one, which will represent the sun. Or maybe you can go out into the playground and spread out arranged for children to be spread out at appropriate distances around the sun, and you can have all sorts of fun. So that's the sort of the kinesthetic dimension to it. So moving on, just a few sort of things about the sort of structural dimension. A globe is a really good way. If you want to sort of just talk about land and sea, you get a much better impression from a globe than you do from an atlas. Atlases don't normally dwell too much on maps of the Pacific Ocean, which take up the other half of this image on the left. But we can begin to talk about the great blocks of land, and we'll pick up on the curriculum in a minute, but the continents and the oceans and the naming of parts does provide a framework which really is something that enables us all to think about the world that we live in. So there's our globe on the left, and there on the right, another globe. This is the spinning image, and the point here is that day and night is pretty fundamental for all of us. It's absolutely crucial, and what causes it? The spinning of the Earth, and the way that we rotate every 24 hours, and the shadow of darkness falls upon us as the spinning takes place. So lots of opportunities for demonstrating this with the globe. Again, you couldn't do that with an atlas, and so the globe comes into its own here as well. We go on to the next one, just the one more, please, which takes us on to the last bit of the naming of parts that I just wanted to flag up. If we go just stay with the naming of parts, Anthony, that's the one. Spinning around, of course, we spin around an axis, and you can demonstrate that with a little disc of whatever, with a stick in the middle, and spin, and you can see where the axis is and how it works. And immediately you get the equator halfway between the North and the South Pole, which gives us the chance to talk about northern hemispheres and southern hemispheres, and places which are going to be hotter and places which are going to be colder. And you can begin to look at that in different ways, and that picks up on the other key points, as it were. There we are, spinning in space, North Pole, South Pole, the equator halfway between the two, day and night, and going around the sun. And there's the sort of the big picture, as it were, of where we are and what's happening around about us. And of course, one of the things that you'll pick up on all this is there's a lot of science going on here. And I welcome that. I think the links between geography and other subjects is absolutely one to treasure and one to exploit. We don't need to keep geography in a box. It can spill out and link up, and it does spill out and link up with everything else in lots of different ways, because we're telling the story and exploring what the Earth is like, what this Earth that we live in is, and very special planet is actually like. So if we just go on to different, where you might want to know, well, where on earth can I get globes? What are they, what are the different sources? And actually the educational suppliers provide a wonderful range of soft ones, blow up ones, and fixed ones. And the blow up ones have the advantage that you can, they crumple and you can pack away when you don't want them. They're very versatile. Some of them are completely blank, so you can draw on them and write on them. Some of them are coloured. Some of them have got information about countries. There's a huge choice of inflatable globes. That's the one on the bottom left. The slightly fuzzy one on the top right is that's a fabric one, and that's great for throwing around. You can throw get children to catch the globe and do all sorts of wonderful games like that. And obviously the fixed globe on the bottom right gives us the different creatures and animals, which I noticed in all the atlases that we're going to come back to, I think. But animals is such a good theme, isn't it? And you can populate. It's interesting to see what pictures actually are chosen. You'll notice that that one's tilted at an angle, and we don't really at Key Stage 1. It gets a little bit tricky, the tilting at the angle, and you can quickly get into the sort of spinning the seasons and so on. And it is a more complicated area, but it's there at an angle, and maybe just doesn't need to be too much said about that. It's just that is how it is. So those are the globes. And then if we just go on, staying with Key Stage 1, a flat map of one kind or another. Here's an attempt. Difficult to get the 3D, the globe is the 3D version, the atlas is the 2D version, and as soon as you go onto the flat map, you begin to get all sorts of distortions. This one's a little bit more distorted than it ought to be because it's a double page, which I couldn't quite press down completely flat, but you get the general idea that of where the key bits of the world are, and the shape of chance to revisit the continents and so on. And I can see that Paul is just putting some ideas on blow-up globes on the chat, so you can keep an eye on that at the same time. So there we are with our continents and oceans. What does the curriculum say? Well, I wanted to hang on to the purpose in particular. The high quality education should inspire pupils. I think that's really important. Curiosity and fascination about the world and its people that will remain with them for the rest of their lives. That's a sentence in the curriculum that I treasure. I don't treasure all the sentences in the curriculum at the moment, but that's one to hold on to. And there we are, the Key Stage 1 content, and this is very much the naming of parts, the 7 continents, 5 oceans, using maps, atlases and globes to identify hot and cold areas in relation to, there they are, equator, North and South Pole, and using simple compass directions. So the Key Stage 2 story takes us on to more complicated maps, and we're just about, there it is, just flashing up. That looks a bit frantic, doesn't it? But actually, if you look at it, you've got the equator across the middle, and you've got lots of red and pink areas, which are the hot parts of the world. And as you go towards the edges or the top and bottom, you get to the blue, which is the cold bits. So that's hot and cold, as it were, taken a little bit further into different climate zones. And it gets a bit messy in the mid-latitudes, but you can begin to compare and begin to ask questions of this. And I'll say quite a lot in a few minutes about asking questions of maps. But that, of course, I like that in the sense that because we've got the arrows on it, it's a little bit more, it's not quite so static. And I think that's an important part, because atlas maps can look a little bit frozen in time. If we go on to the next one, this is also weather and climate. Obviously, something quite different's going on here. You've probably got it already. Yep, it's global warming and what's happened. And it shows, we haven't got the key on there, but the extent of the heating in the Arctic is particularly noticeable, and indeed Antarctica. But there are also some parts which have actually got colder. Global warming, or is it climate breakdown or climate disruption? Lots of different things words we can use for it. And that is sad, or unfortunately, just where we are. Well, that's a year ago, and we know that global temperatures are going on rising. So it's getting increasingly hot and disrupted world as a result. So that takes us into a different aspect of climate and climate weather, always a very powerful topic for geographers and geography, as it is for science. And the next one takes another thematic approach, I think. It's looking at world population. And you can begin to say, well, where are they, most people? And you immediately pick out Europe, perhaps, as coming into the sort of browny colours, but India and China especially, with nearly half the world's population, or around half, I can't remember now, I should know, living in Asia, and the rest scattered around. And actually, Africa and South America and North America looking significantly less populous than Europe and Asia and Australia. And Australia, we've got a fair amount of Oceania there. Australia and the South Island of New Zealand showing up as with no brown on it at all. So major world cities, again, where are they? Where are they concentrated? What are they? And you can see on that map that most of them are now in China and India, which again is this is a world that's changing. And so setting us alongside the population map, and this is where the maps get interesting for me, in the sense that you can get drawn into them on the same double page. This is one map from a double page, and the other bit of the double page, if you go on, Anthony, is this page, which on the right you can see the growth of cities since 1900. These are the 1 million plus cities. In 1900, most of the 1 million plus cities were in Europe. And you can see the great increase by 1950, but the huge increase by 2018, where so much so that India and China have sort of coalesced as a great a yellow blob, as it were. And on the left-hand side, the straightforward charts, the pie charts, there's good maths, isn't it, showing town and country balance, and the fact that we now have more people living in towns around the world than are in the countryside for the first time in changeover around 2000, probably first time in human history that's been the case. And then some charts showing, a little block graph showing population increase of particular cities. So the next one will take us into the issues. This is from a mainstream junior atlas, showing refugees at that particular time, very traumatic issues around refugees. You can see the inset of the Ukraine there, and there are little captions and so on that go with all this, but the number of people who have fled from Ukraine, constantly changing information. But what this map tells us more than anything is that most refugees go to, if they cross over borders, go to the next door country. And you can see, although there's so much talk about immigration and mass migration of people into Western Europe, it's nothing compared with the countries which are next to the war zones. That map's before the Gaza conflicts and problems around Syria. So it's constantly needing to be updated, but it does tell a story. And if we go on to the next one, I think that will take us to a different one. And I just want you to look at that for a minute, and just about to finish off, but asking questions about maps. There's a straightforward country map, a political map showing the countries of Europe. What questions can we ask about that? We might do it in the chat. I don't know if anybody wants to put questions into the chat. I did a quick sort of question session with myself earlier, and I came up with about 10 questions. How many countries are there in Europe? Which one's the largest? Which ones are the smallest? Which one's landlocked? How many of them are landlocked? What about the shape of the countries? I always think that Norway's got a particularly good, fascinating profile with all those islands off the coast and very long and stringy, whereas somewhere like Spain is a good square, solid one. Comparisons with the physical map, absolutely right, Paula. We haven't got any clues there, but if it's set alongside a physical map, you can then begin to look at which countries are basically flat, which ones are more mountainous, which countries are surrounded by sea and islands, which ones have territories which are split. And so you've got the United Kingdom, which is, got two, it's got the Northern Ireland part of the United Kingdom, which is across the Irish Sea and various and the Straits. So that is another one. Italy, of course, has got Sardinia and Sicily, which are detached. Greece is really complicated. So lots of questions there. Which countries have the most borders? Spain, for example, has just got 2, whereas Germany, if you look at it, has a huge number. And of course, that has all sorts of geopolitical implications. What do the countries mean? How are they coloured? Somebody's made a choice. Thank you, Tess, for that prompt. Somebody's made a choice to use those colours, and they carry subliminal messages. Children read colours in different ways, and they have preferences for particular colours, and that is something which Atlas consultants can alert the cartography department to, but usually these maps are drawn by people who are not thinking along those lines. Where does Europe begin and end? That is giving us constant problems. And you'll see that European Russia has been coloured in yellow on there. But I notice in our Junior Atlas that Russia, the whole of the political part of Russia, appears on the map of Asia. And there's a lot of ambiguities around Eurasia and so on as to where you want to draw the boundaries, depending on what you're thinking about. So all sorts of interesting questions, but also a huge challenge for insecure readers looking at these unfamiliar names. And if you just go to the next slide, Anthony, this is the text on that. We've taken the text out, and there it is. So this is decontextualized words, many of which are unfamiliar to children, and they're dotted around the page. Really a real challenge for readability. So Bratislava, Chisinau, Moldova, really complicated names to read, Balearic Islands, alongside more familiar ones, hopefully, like the United Kingdom. So there's a whole thing around language that comes across here, but having the names, being able to name the parts is lots and lots of different ways of coming at it. So there's our maps of the world and going down to a continental level, and just a quick glance at the curriculum, I think, that comes up next is what the curriculum requirements are. Oh, no, what is an atlas? Lots of different ways of using it. I've just highlighted 4 there. Source of reference, where is it? Definitive locational knowledge, which tells us, let's say, about European or Russia and the shape of the different countries, supporting all these sort of questions and inquiries that you want to investigate.
What are you
and
doing?
stimulating imagination and creative spaces. So that just a sort of nod in that direction. And then the last one before the curriculum is a reminder that map conventions, when children are drawing maps, need to take into account the title, labels, scale bar. This is right through the junior years. The key, what does the symbol stand for? So what the use of symbols and what type of symbols you're going to use. And are there any other ones that come up on that? Use of color. And I mean, that one blue is used to show water. I remember at one point in my teaching career where I was working with year 9s, and after a bit, one of the children came up to me, one of the pupils came up to me and said, "What does the blue on the map mean?" And I thought, gosh, it is year 9. You know, what has happened that this child's got to year 9 and hasn't understood the most basic colour symbol of the lot? And so those are some of the conventions that we want to be aware of. The grid as well, which helps you to locate places. And now I think we do get to the national curriculum requirement. If you just go on, Anthony, there we are. Again, the same purpose, locating the world's countries, a little bit more of the naming of parts, a little bit more detail about using maps, atlases, and digital computer mapping, which I think that we're going to hear about a lot more in a moment, and the 8 points of the compass. So lots of fun to be had with maps, lots of fun to be had with atlases, and that's hopefully just a taster.
Thank you, Stephen. That is not only absolutely brilliant input, but it was exactly the right length of time. So thank you very much indeed for that.
Total coincidence, Julia.
So Stephen has shown us just how complicated maps are, but also what an invaluable source of information they are when we're pursuing geographical inquiries and investigations. And I know Paula Owens is now going to pick up that theme as she moves on to using digital map. So can I hand over to you, Paula?
Thanks very much, Julia. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me along this afternoon. And thank you, Stephen. Fascinating as ever. And just reminds us how important it is to have atlases in the classroom. They're certainly not outmoded by any means. I'm going to talk a little bit about digital maps, perhaps moving a bit more into the more modern aspect of mapping. And we often think of digital maps incorporating GIS as well. So I'm just going to say a little bit about GIS, because sometimes we think that it's a bit above younger children, which it's definitely not, because a geographic information system is just a computer system of some kind that captures, stores, checks and displays data related to positions on Earth's surface. And it might show lots of different kinds of data, such as streets, buildings, vegetation. So when we think about that, most digital maps will show that kind of information anyway. So we are exposing children to it quite a lot of the time. So my session is about digital maps and inquiry. So I thought I'd just start by saying something about inquiry and just reinforce the idea that geographical inquiry is a process. Julia and I have in fact just been writing an article about this for a forthcoming edition of Primary Geography. And it is a signature pedagogy, something that Tessa and Simon stress in their book as well, how important it is. So I've chosen to just take this aspect from Margaret Roberts, who is perhaps the definitive expert on inquiry. In fact, she is the definitive expert. And Margaret identifies these 4 areas. She said, with inquiry, you have this need to know that you create. You use some kind of data, you gather evidence in some way, you make sense of it, and you reflect on the learning. So I'm going to try and refer back to this using some maps to illustrate. Thanks, Anthony. My next point is to say that maps matter, of course, and why they matter so much in geography. It's because they are part of the key language of geography, and they help us identify spatial patterns. And places are more than just a distinct location on a map. We know that maps can help us explain facts about places. They can help us also look at different opinions about places as well. So there's just a few quotes from Ofsted as well, from the Ofsted Review of Geography, which is a really useful read. from Ian Freeland from 2021. Thank you, Anthony. So, digital maps. I'm sure we've all used Google Earth in our classrooms, and this is why digital maps can be so great to use, because we can personalize them. We can think about where do we live, and we can zoom in and make it quite magical. So if you could just play that sequence, Anthony, I'm going to take you into the Isle of Sheppey and my nearest school, hopefully. And of course, as Stephen said, we can talk about using Google Maps, what it shows in terms of land areas and oceans in early years and the beginning of primary. So we've now zoomed into Isle of Sheppey. We've zoomed into this aerial view. There's St Clement's Primary School, which is quite close to me, quite a new school. So just using this aerial image, and I'm including aerial images as well, it's really important to include these with digital mapping. We can start that inquiry, we can start to stimulate that conversation. Next slide, Anthony. So if we go back to that inquiry model, thinking about what is our school like, and when children start school in the early years, and Key Stage 1 in particular, learning about their local area, where they live, where their school is something that we all do. So we can use aerial images to kind of stimulate conversations. We can go out and gather data about our school using the maps as well. We can do field work, and then we can locate features and find out what we've learned and think about further questions. So I'm going to illustrate some of that in the following slides. Thank you, Anthony. Now, I've gone here back to Google Earth, and I'm looking at an oblique view. Now, oblique view is different to an overhead view in that it's slightly angled. And this is the kind of view that children will first become more familiar with, rather than going to a full overhead view. They can help to make more sense out of this. So using this, we can start to say to children, you know, what features do you recognize? What do you think you can see? And if you click through, Anthony, we can see some of the features that we might come up with and be able to label. We're an island, we're close to the sea. There's the beach, we can see that quite clearly. Of course, we've got the school marked. There's the housing where most of the children who go to that school live. They'll be able to identify that. I know that because I've done that with some of these children. And we can identify fields, and there's other features that we might be able to pick up, the road, for example. So we begin to develop this vocabulary, and then children start to want to ask questions. You know, does it always look like that? Let's go to Digimaps. Now, Digimaps, we're going back to an aerial view, and Digimaps will give us a very detailed view of our school, or a zoomed in place. In fact, the beauty of Digimaps compared to other kinds of OS mapping is that Digimaps will zoom into a scale of 12, 50, 1, 2, 5, 0. So we can zoom right in, we can look at names on houses, numbers on houses. We can see it in great detail. So here we might be able to identify the features in the school, the playground. We can see the parking spaces, and actually we can have conversations about how it's quite empty. There's just one car there. Maybe that's the caretaker. So maybe this is after school in the summer's evening. Maybe it's during the holidays. Lots of questions we can ask about that. We can then begin to use a sliding function on Digimaps. Thank you, Anthony. And we can begin to compare that with the more formal OS mapping, so that we are helping children to make sense between this, this aerial view and the more abstract formal mapping of Ordnance Survey features. Thank you, Anthony. And if we put that together and use these regularly with young children, we can start to get them thinking about how these all relate to each other. We've got aerial images, our formal mapping of the same area. And on Google Street View, we can see that more 3D image. Does our school look like that today? Not in the middle of winter, it doesn't. Perhaps we can go outside and check what's different, what's similar, how is it changed, what do we notice? We've already got that curiosity, that beginning framework to begin to ask more questions. And something I used to do when I worked in early years in Key Stage 1 was to print some of these images out, laminate them, put them in the book box, and get children to use them for conversations, to build models from, and to draw on with pens and wipe off, etc. So they were beginning to become familiar with these different representations of place in a more abstract way. Thank you. But as well as adding in facts about places, we can use maps to add in some feelings and sensory impressions about place. So, for example, using Digimaps, we might want to go outside, do some field work, and write a listening poem and add it to a specific location in the school grounds. We might want to zoom into 1 square metre of the school grounds and do our beginning formal map and create a map looking with magnifying glasses and drawing it out and marking in what we can see and whereabouts it is in that square metre. Thank you, Anthony. We might want to add other images. Now, this isn't the same school. This is a school in Leytonstone. You can see it's a lot busier. We can identify features there, and we might want to do a walk around the outside of the school in the school grounds, and we can use the emoticons. We can stop at different places within the grounds and perhaps outside the school, and we can rate it. Is it a place we particularly like? Don't we like it? Why not? We can create a graph out of that. We can come back, we can add that to a map, and we can talk about it. So already we're developing our awareness of this place and enriching it with different layers. We can also describe the features and develop this vocabulary all the time. So maps help us use this relational vocabulary next to, besides, underneath, etc. Thank you. I've taken this slide from something on the RGS, Royal Geographical Society site. This is their Mapping Home suite of materials that are free to download. And this just reminds us that, again, as we begin to learn about maps and what they are showing, we can look at the patterns that different housing types show, which is something we might be learning about in Key Stage 1, developing that really important vocabulary, a detached house, a terraced house, a semi-detached house, looking at photographs of them, identifying them in fieldwork, and then learning to recognize them on the map, ones joined together. Thank you, Anthony. If you could like to click the arrows and we'll see if we can find some. So maps, just reinforcing these particular map reading skills as well. So we're thinking about making maps, interpreting maps, and reading maps more carefully. Thank you. Something else that we do in Key Stage 1 is thinking about the weather in particular. We all do that. So if we think about this inquiry, we want to talk about the weather. We might be asking how hot or cold it is today, what's the weather like, which direction the wind's coming from. And then our data hopefully will involve us going outside and gathering some weather data using weather instruments such as a weather vane, for example, and a thermometer. And then we're going to make sense of that, perhaps create some charts and graphs and maps, hopefully, and think about what it tells us. Does it help remind us what clothes we need to put on, for example? So when we're doing this, if we look at the next slide, we can see that when we go outside to gather weather data, rather than just going outside and just doing it, it's really important to give it that spatial dimension. And maps can help us recall exactly where we've taken that information from. If we do that at the same time, every day for a week, for example, it's a much more rigorous inquiry. And if we do it in 2 different places, as was done in this school here, then we can start to talk about why the data might look different. For example, why is it 9 degrees right out there in the field? And why is it a balmier 10 degrees close to the buildings? And we can talk about, well, the wind isn't blowing so much there, it's less exposed. So, and if we might recognize that pattern building over time, so it helps children to think in a more nuanced and geographical way about what weather data is actually telling us. And children can do this in Key Stage 1 quite easily. They can come up and have these conversations if you support them with it. Thank you. Now, just recently, we had quite a little bout of snow. You might recall, some of you might still have a little bit of snow. And we had a very interesting example on January the 5th, where it was 1 degree and snowing in Sowerby in Yorkshire, and it was 12 degrees and raining, and indeed there were some floods down in the south in Leytonstone. So as children become more familiar with their own territory mapping of weather data, and perhaps towards the end of Key Stage 1, and again, nothing wrong with repeating this in Key Stage 2, because it's really crucial to keep thinking about this kind of weather data and what it can tell us about the weather and about climate. We can start to make comparisons, and we can map this, and we can have conversations about why it is different and what kind of patterns are emerging from this and which one is further north. So again, just expanding and developing our reasoning using the power of maps. Thank you, Anthony. We might want to go online as well and find some other supporting evidence. I went online and I very quickly found this lovely photograph of people enjoying themselves on a snow day up north and battling through lots of water down south. So we could find photographs and add them to the maps as well for further evidence, so we can build up a picture of what's happening. Thank you. So as we move into Key Stage 2, we might be looking about settlements and learning about our local area in more detail. Gone back to Leytonstone now. And what you can see here is a Digimaps with postcodes enabled, postcode layer, which I think is quite fascinating. And you could map where you want to live. And thanks to the power of GIS and importing sheets like Excel, quite easily you could get children to put their postcode in one column in an Excel sheet and put their name or initials in another, or indeed you might be labeling other kinds of features, such as interesting features in the local area. And there's you have the ability in Digimaps to be able to just import that file and it will automatically map it for you, which seems like magic. But it helps you to answer some questions such as, what do we mean by local? Where does local begin and end? We just take that for granted, don't we? Does local have a definitive radius? Is it the same in rural areas as urban areas? And of course, we use local to mean the area in which we live, work and play, our everyday lives. So by children adding that kind of information to maps, where they live, where they play, where they go shopping, we can start to build up a picture of our local area and how it might be different for different people within the class. So that can be quite an interesting inquiry. Thank you, Anthony. We might be looking at how our place has changed and why. So we might start by looking at what it was like in the 1890s. On Digimaps, we can go back and look at the 1890s layer. We can see this settlement, such as this ribbon settlement around a Roman road in Edenbridge, and we can colour it in, just draw over it, shade it in quite easily. And then we can move forward to the present time and draw around this settlement, and we could even measure it if we wanted to and see how much of it has grown. We might have conversations about why it's grown. Has it grown enough? Where do we think it's going to grow next? So all of these beginning conversations to start by mapping some real information onto the map. Thank you. My next inquiry is perhaps an unusual one I was doing with the school in Leytonstone. What ancient trees are there where we live? I don't know if you know what an ancient tree is, but it's quite fun to find out. They're a really old tree in the last part of their life, sadly, but some of them are literally hundreds and hundreds of years old. How do they become landmarks? What kind of data can we use to find out? Well, the Woodland Trust have got an ancient tree inventory that you can use to get information from, and then we can go out and do fieldwork and measure and record them and add them to maps. You can even upload them to the national map, which gives it a real sense of purpose. So lots of questions to ask about this. But first of all, we need to know, are there any near us? So if we go to the next slide, this particular school found out that when they looked at the ancient tree inventory on the Woodland Trust site, there is the key. No ancient trees nearby that we could see in the ground, but there were lots of veteran trees, which are very stately and elderly trees of some significance. And there was one relatively near the school, or it looked like it was near the school on the map. So by clicking on that and finding out more data, if we go to the next slide, we could see that the nearest tree was a veteran sweet chestnut tree, and very helpfully, it has a grid reference. Now in Key Stage 2, children are learning to use 4- and 6-figure grid references. This is quite a lot longer than that. However, if children know what a grid reference is, that it shows a particular point in space on a map, then if they understand what it is, they can copy and paste it into Digimaps to actually locate the map, which is what we did. If we go to the next slide, we can see that by putting it on the map, there it is on Wanstead Flats, I think, and measured it. And yes, it was within walkable distance for realistic fieldwork. So using that inquiry to really drive a purpose of fieldwork, is it feasible? Does it exist? Can we get there? And then deciding how to carry out the fieldwork. Now, working through these stages of inquiry is, as the Ofsted quote in the previous slide reminds us, a really vital part of good practice in geography. It's not enough just to put a question in front of a unit and hope for the best. It's really important to think through these stages and maps really help us doing that by stimulating inquiry, providing us with some hard evidence and helping us to record and communicate what we found out. Next slide, Anthony. So just to finish with, because I know you're doing volcanoes next week, I thought I'd just quickly mention this on Digimaps that I think is quite fun. These layers on Digimaps, switching them on in class can be quite a light bulb moment. It helps with the synergy of geography to make these connections. So here we have the outline of some tectonic plates, and if we click through slowly, Anthony, and again, we can see the plate boundaries there against the map of the world. We can see the different kinds of plate boundaries because there's a key there. And if we click again, we can add some mountain ranges. Oh, and we can start to make connections between mountain ranges and plate boundaries and tectonics, for example, especially down the west coast of the Americas there. We can see that nice and clearly. If we added the volcanoes, hey presto, we really begin to see that connection. So here the maps are really helping us make that vital connection between the pattern of volcanoes and tectonic plates and thinking about how they're connected. If you go to the next one, we can zoom in to Digimaps to the island of Hawaii and look at the volcanoes there. And there was some serious eruptions there a couple of years ago. And I put a link to a Newsweek story where lots of people were talking about what it was like to live on the island. So if we click again, Anthony, we can make our maps come alive and personalize them. And again, by showing some real quotes from real people picked up from news stories. So when we talk about in the news, we can harvest those quotes, add them to maps quite easily to help us tell a story about places and what's happening there so that we sort of deepen our understanding. Next slide, please. Sadly, as you all know, there are absolutely devastating fires going on in Los Angeles at the moment. You can't help but bump into it on the news, and it's quite harrowing. Now, this is very difficult to think about teaching something when it's live and happening, and so many people are losing their lives, losing their livelihoods and their homes. It's just devastating. But at the same time, children are exposed to this, and if they have questions, we need to be prepared to answer them with facts. And sadly, the facts have been very a bit of a mishmash at the moment. There's some opposing sides of different facts about why this is happening. So it's always good to come back to some geographical information. So if we go to the next slide, we might want to show some of NASA's aerial imagery, which shows the awful smoke coming out of the Palisades fire, for example, and talk about how the Santa Ana winds, which are symptomatic of a particular weather phenomenon over parts of the parts of North America that bring dry air from desert regions. And as that dry air circulates around a high pressure area, it gets funneled through the mountains, through the canyons, picks up speed, dries out the already parched vegetation because there's been a drought, and just exacerbates the fire risk. So we can use geography to just underscore some of the factual information about that. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide, please, Anthony. And there's another map that I found on the site that just looks at some of the worst affected areas as well in quite detail. And you can compare that with maps on Digimaps as well. Next slide. I'm going to finish with this one on global trade that I think is quite fun. Shows the shipping in real time if you want to follow it. And if you're talking about trade and as an introduction to trade, this is just brilliant for talking about what goes where and why. Why is there hardly anything in the Southern Ocean? Why is it just passenger vessels heading to that part of Antarctica? Look where the tankers are going. Look at all the green cargo vessels. So lots of conversations, and as Stephen said, lots of questions you can have to start off a topic of trade to really drive that inquiry and whet the appetite. Now, I've got a few seconds left, so I'm just going to quickly rattle through a couple of promotions at the end. First of all, free CPD in Geography and History is being offered by the Historic Towns Trust. It should be being run. Sorry, my timer. Historic Towns Trust. Peter Vijakovic and myself hope to be leading that session at the University of Bath on Tuesday, the 25th of March. It's an all-day session. It's completely free, and we're going out to do some field work. So keep your eyes open for more details about that. If you're interested, we'd love you to come along, particularly if you are in the Bath area, which would be great. Next slide. And we've just launched with the National Association for Environmental Education a year of environmental lunacy. Please check out the website. It's lots of fun, and it's inviting you to think about the lunar phases throughout the year and what you'd call them by thinking about the kind of wildlife that you might see in your area. And I kick off with the first blog, and I argue that rather than calling it a wolf moon, we ought to call it a fox moon, because this is the time you're going to hear foxes call at night time. Thank you very much, and I will end. Thank you.
Very much indeed, Paula. As ever, a fantastic range of questions that we can use to inform our inquiries using maps of all sorts. So thank you so much to you and to Stephen for your fantastic inputs tonight. Anthony, do we now have Sally's slides, do you think, or not?
We do. I'm doing a quick juggle in the background. Let's just.
Thank you so much.
Sally's
If you
still
could
with
get
us?
those up, Sally's still with us, yes.
Here we go.
So while Anthony's doing that, I'll just say thank you all so much for coming this evening. Thank you to the GeogLive team and to Stephen and Paula, our contributors tonight. We do have another GeogLive in March. There is a slide at the end. I'm going to hand over to you, Sally. You've got a couple of minutes to talk about these fabulous books.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's not much to add really, kind of from what I said before. It's just a few books and resources that help you to explicitly put a mapping lesson into a classroom sequence without too much sort of planning or necessarily like pre-teaching needed. So Martha Maps It Out and the Me on a Map one, kind of encouraging Key Stage 1 children to consider how they could create a map of their own journey to school or their own local areas. Same with kind of The Boy Who Loves Maps and the Naughty Bus. It's just encouraging directional language and opportunities for more kind of abstract maps and describing and annotating journeys. And then it's just not to overlook the fact that the Collins atlases, UK and World in Maps, there are activity books that match page for page. So again, there are ideas there directly linking. You don't have to put the worksheets together because they're there if they match what you wanted to teach.
Thank you so much, Sally. And again, there's some absolutely fabulous books there. And of course, the Collins atlases, those activity sheets are produced by Stephen Scoffham, who contributed to our session this evening. So I can see that there are lots of questions and comments in the chat. Please do add anything else you want to add. We've mentioned lots of fabulous resources today. I do hope many of you will find them useful. This GeogLive session will be put on our chat on our YouTube channel within the next few hours. So it'll be there for everybody to see if you want to go back and look at some of the detail of some of the slides or some of the detail of some of these atlases that Sophie has put together for us. I mean, there's some absolutely fabulous looking ones there. So if you want to do that, they will all be up on our YouTube website by the end of the evening. And then just remains to thank everybody again and to say the next GeogLive is in March. It's at a usual slot on a Wednesday afternoon. It's the 12th of March, and we are focusing on a very popular and common Key Stage 2 topic, volcanoes and earthquakes, and 3 of the GeogLive team will be presenting work they have done in their own classrooms around the theme of volcanoes and earthquakes. So that will be Jen, who wasn't able to be with us today, Sally and Sophie. So that is something for anybody who teaches these topics in Key Stage 2 to look forward to. I know it will be a fabulous session. Okay, so recording has stopped. Thank you all very